All right, hello. Welcome everyone, both in person and via Zoom. I know we had a lot of people who RSVP'd via Zoom because we have summer classes right now that a bunch of them are on Zoom. So welcome all. My name is Erin Mayo Adam. I am the director of the LGBTQ Policy Center at Roosevelt House, and I'm a professor in the Political Science Department at Hunter College. And I'm really delighted to introduce this evening's film event. We are here an LGBTQ plus short film showcase. Tonight's event features 5 short films made by local award-winning filmmakers. And following this screening, we are really privileged to have a discussion with the directors of all the films with us. So please be sure that you stay for that. The 5 films that we'll be showing this evening are Pink and Blue, directed by Carmen Lebu, which tells the heartwarming story of the joys and sorrows of first-time parenting for a trans couple of color. How to Raise a Black Boy, directed by Justice Jamal Jones, is an experimental fairy tale dedicated to the modern black boy in which 4 children disappear one night and find themselves on a fantastical journey to break the curses of black boyhood. Ice Cold, directed by Sekia Dorset, is about a blushing bride having the best and worst day of her life, and Sekia will be joining us after the film screening via Zoom. Hold On to Me, directed by Teshima Brennan and Rajvi Desai, follows Mother Latravius as she tries to hold her nonprofit organization together and struggles with health issues. Teshima Brennan will be joining us after the screening. And Fuck 'Em Right Back, directed by Harris Duran, is about a queer black aspiring Baltimore rapper who must outwit his vengeful day job boss to avoid getting fired after accidentally eating an edible, which is, will end with a comedy, and the others are not comedies, but they're organized in a sort of life cycle format, which will become clear as you watch the showcase. I'd like to thank the CUNY LGBTQ Advisory Council and its president, Mitch Drazen, as well as the Roosevelt House Director, Harold Holzer, and staff, especially the LGBTQ Policy Center Program Assistant, Alexis Fisher, the Roosevelt House Curator of Public Programs, Mac Barrett, and our production coordinator, Danny Colkin, also our communications electronic media manager, Aaron Lee Feynman, and of course the filmmakers for tonight's films, especially Sekia Dorset for putting this all together for us, for making this event possible. So now without further ado, we'll go ahead and begin the films, and I'll see you all again once the films end for the Q&A with the filmmakers. All right, we've reached the panel portion of the evening, so I guess what I'll do is just invite up the filmmakers, and I'm going to just introduce you all before we open the Q&A. I'll ask them questions, and I'll open for audience Q&A at the end, so feel free to come to the stage. Oh, when you come up, please turn on your microphones as well. All right. So I'll go ahead and introduce everybody as they take their seat. So first we have Carmen Lebu right here. So Carmen was the director of Pink and Blue. Carmen is a non-binary Black Filipinx filmmaker, playwright, and actor. As a writer, Lebu was chosen as a semifinalist for the 2018 Sundance New Voices Lab for their queer comedy drama series Koi. As a filmmaker, Lebu was a Black Public Media Fund finalist in 2020, and they have been featured in Paper Magazine's Paper Predictions 100 People Taking Over 2019, and they were also named a 2018 New Legacy Maker honoree in collaboration with Disruptor Foundation. So we're really thrilled to have Carmen with us. I also say Carmen currently stars as Dre on the L Word Generation Q, so we're excited that you're here. Thank you so much. Next, we have Justice Jamal Jones, the director of How to Raise a Black Boy. Justice is right here. Justice is a filmmaker, actor, and writer based in New York City. Their debut film, How to Raise a Black Boy, is a reimagining of Jones's childhood, linking their boyhood to their identity as a non-binary artist. And the film screened internationally nationally at more than 30 film festivals, earning 10 awards. Justice was also a 2021 Sundance Ignite Fellow, and in 2022, they were commissioned to direct for MTV and Calvin Klein. Thank you so much. We're really excited to have you here this evening, Justice. And then next we have Sekia Dorset, who's joining us via Zoom. Is Sekia, oh great, she's here. Hello. Sekia also organized tonight's event, so we're really just thrilled to have her here. Sekia is a GLAAD award-winning filmmaker who centers a multidimensional Black experience in her work. In 2019, Dorset directed a 4-episode documentary series, Stonewall 50: The Revolution, for NBC News and NBC Out. Recently, she was one of the cinematographers who brought In Our Mother's Gardens to Netflix, a work of intergenerational Black women confessing storytelling to critical and audience acclaim. Her films have been screened at Tribeca Film Festival, Urban World Film Festival, the Brooklyn Museum, Frameline Film Fest, and Outfest Film Festival, and have been written about in publications including HuffPost, Mike, BuzzFeed, and Essence. And she also holds a fine arts degree from Hunter College. So we're really excited and thrilled to have a Hunter alum back with us this evening. And next we have Tashima Brennan, the co-director, of Hold On to Me. Tashima Brennan is a visual storyteller and journalist based in Brooklyn. And as an emerging documentary filmmaker, they aim to tell nuanced stories about Black, queer, and trans people as they navigate institutions and systems not built to support them. Tashima was the 2022-2023 recipient of a Magic Grant from the Brown Institute for Media Innovation for their pilot project, Transforming Journalism. They were also a 2022 Reuters Institute Fellow at the University of Oxford, where they researched how journalists can build trust in trans communities as a gateway to telling nuanced stories about them. So we're thrilled to have Tashima with us this evening. And finally, we have Harris Duran, the director of Fuck 'Em Right Back, the comedy that we all saw at the end, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2022 and received a nomination for the Grand Jury Prize. The film won many awards, including Best Comedy at Aspen Short Fest, qualifying the film for Oscar consideration. Duran also produced Dee Smith's feature documentary Kokomo City, executive produced by Elena Waithe, which premiered in the 2023 Film Festival, where it won both the Next Innovator Award and the Audience Award. So I just gave a couple of short lines about everyone's introduction, everyone's bios. You can read more about them in the program. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I think I'm gonna sit along the stage with you all because I feel awkward.
Just want to shout out these incredible filmmakers. It has been wonderful to get to know all of you. I'm sending love from the Flaherty Seminar Documentary Conference in Skidmore College, where co-director Raj V sends love to Tashima. And so I'm really excited about tonight. So thank you so much again, Erin and the Roseville House for having us.
So I guess we'll go ahead and I have some just general questions to open up, and then I have specific questions for each of you about your films. So just really quickly, these are all superb films. I really felt like all the characters had this extraordinary depth to them that I don't even get in feature-length films. So I thought I'd just open by asking why did you all decide to do the short film format for these? What does that bring to the characters in the films?
I can start. I think for How to Raise a Black Boy, the short film format was really helpful because it was a fairy tale, and kind of trying to specifically make like a fairy tale that can span from like adulthood to childhood was really interesting, and just trying to condense all of that. I think making it like a short just kind of worked within that kind of framework and trying to bring like a story to life.
Yeah, I think for me, it is always a lot easier when you're doing documentary storytelling to start with a short to see if it's really necessary for it to be a longer piece. And this short in particular, is really a love letter to Mother Lou Travius, who at the time were following around for about 10 months, and really wanted to make something that highlighted who she was as a person and kind of the work that she brought to the community before we actually really sat down and thought about if this could potentially be something that's more nuanced and worth telling in a longer form.
And your film is currently in production in the longer form?
Yes, so the longer form film is called Mother Wit, and it basically follows Mother Lou Travius's chosen daughters as they strive to keep her legacy alive after her death, and also reckon with the promises that they made to her while she was living. And it just kind of follows them as we watch one generation pass on wisdom and courage and knowledge and survival to the next generation, and what they do and how they deal with that.
All right, thank you.
You can call me Boo. My last name is LeBoo. I chose to do this film as a short because I was asked. And I think that my answers are always going to be spiritual, so excuse me. As a Black Filipino and also a non-binary person, it's kind of fell into my lap in a way. A friend of mine, April, who actually shot the film.
I love April.
April is
I love her.
amazing. April is my bestie. That is, I love April. But April had met with Kadex, who wrote the film, and then April was like, actually, you know, they were at a Rafiki screening, and April was like, you need to connect with Boo. So then we connected, and everything seemed to fall in alignment, because I was already a huge fan of Jojo Brown, who you see in the film, and is also Filipino and a trans woman. So I was like, this is my moment to connect not only with, you know, community, but also to make something that creates a legacy for us trans and non-binary people that, you know, can be a part of that canon. So that's why I said yes.
So this film came, so Doris Kasap, who is a friend of mine, and she produced the film with me and she EP'd the film. So she knew DDM, and he's an extraordinary talent, and she wanted to do something with him. And so I came up with a film idea, a feature film idea, actually. And so I brought it to her, and she loved it, and we brought it to him, and he loved it. And so then I went down to Baltimore. We went down to Baltimore, and on the way back, I sort of was like, why don't we do a short first? You know, he had never acted before. He's a very accomplished performer, but had never acted before. And so I was like, why don't we explore this with a short film? And so I wrote it very quickly, and then I think part of the reason that it feels so three-dimensional is he and Kara Young, who plays Yolanda, are such extraordinary talents. You know, so I think that, you know, they didn't know each other, but it feels like they knew each other, and they spent time, and by the end they loved each other, and I think that that comes across in the film. And I think that's part of why it feels so three-dimensional. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Sekia?
You know, I make documentaries, and that's my primary focus. And I really wanted to have an exercise in what it would take to bring a short film idea to life. At the time I was getting married, and I just had this idea, you know, what if I upheld my mother's wishes for myself? And that's where this film came about. So it all started out between an exercise, and there's also like emotional place that I wanted to go to.
Thank you. I think I'm just going to jump into specific questions to make sure we have enough time to get to the Q&A. So I'm going to go through them in the order of the film. So I'll start with Carmen. So your film, Black and Blue.
Pink and Blue.
Pink and Blue. Sorry about that. Examines the process of becoming a parent for a trans couple of color. And the film actually really spoke to me because I just had a baby this past September. So I felt like I had been through a lot of the same themes in the film with my own relationship. There's this part at the beginning of the film where the couple talks about the difficulty of getting pregnant, for example, and this inaccessibility of fertility treatments. Can you say more about that and why you decided to feature that in the film?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, it's really short, but there was a moment in the film where they talked about the inaccessibility of fertility treatments and how this was their only shot for a child. Can you say a little bit more about why you chose to feature that in the film?
I did not write the film, so I can't fully speak to why that, are you asking like why that made the cut?
Yeah, yeah.
There actually isn't a lot of dialogue in the film. I don't know if you noticed there isn't so much. I think I would hope more shown than told in the film. That would be something that I would have to ask the writer. But I do think that having something that speaks of this surprise pregnancy, something that made me feel, this is special. This is a special moment in this story, is just because, like, as like queer, trans, non-binary people, we're talking about how we have kids and how difficult that can be. So I think what also makes this couple special is that they are afforded the privilege to be able to house a child, to feed a child. They're saying, we can figure this out based on, in the few lines that are there, how much they're making and all of those things. We don't really get the visibility of trans and non-binary people who actually do have some level of financial privilege to make a decision based on a surprise pregnancy. So I don't know if that fully answers, but I think that's a part of it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, that definitely does. I know that was a big theme when I went through my own, so I was curious about. Next, I'm going to move on to Justice. So your film is How to Raise a Black Boy. So I'm a really big fan of horror and fantasy films, and I have to say I wasn't expecting your film. It sometimes had this tone of like a fantastical horror film. I was reminded of sort of like Pan's Labyrinth and Guillermo del Toro films. So I was just wondering what led you to that creative choice.
I guess to be completely honest, I think any fairy tale that have to do with specifically Black childhood kind of has this, I guess like this like kind of tone in it. I think growing up, I remember my parents kind of telling me these, like, I guess there's like a shock that happens. I think as a Black child, where, well, for me, there was a shock where I grew up within this kind of bubble with my parents, and I thought, I was like, okay, like I'm fine, like things are good, like I'm from Nebraska, and we just kind of lived in this like bubble in like a farm kind of town as a Black person. Then like there's like this like shattering that kind of happened. I think specifically for me, it happened around like 2016, when I was like, oh, like there's so much violence, there's so much hate, there's so much of these things that are kind of under the surface. And I also think like a good fairy tale in general always has a darker theme. I think like that's kind of the whole idea. Like if you look at like Beauty and the Beast, like that's kind of fucked up. Like The Little Mermaid, it's like that's kind of screwed up too. And I think that is why they're important, because they're giving children, they're like kind of sprinkling a little bit of sugar on something that might be difficult to understand. And for How to Raise a Black Boy, kind of the message that was there for me was trying to understand, I guess, I had a conversation with one of my younger cousins about, it was just like, we were sitting around and there was a lot of conversations about like police brutality. And I think there's something really terrifying when there's kind of this just extreme violence and mass, just like attacks towards your type of people. And I wanted to create something that could kind of start to like turn those gears, but also create hope, and also not be super, I guess, like devastating. Yeah. Sorry, that was a lot, but
No.
I'm not exactly sure why it's dark. I think that's just how it came out too. You know, like I think there's like the honesty. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, especially with the themes that you talked about in your answer. I certainly thought that when I was watching the film, that was sort of an undertone that you were going for. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's move to Sekia. Your film, Ice Cold, examines how external pressures continue to make queer love difficult. And I was just really struck by the use of the wedding in the film, which you mentioned in your answer earlier. I just wanted to ask, what made you decide to use a wedding to examine a queer love story? And it was also the setting of a coming out story. So what made you decide to use it as the setting of a coming out story?
I mean, I waited. So my wife and I will be together for 20 years next January. And and we waited a very long time to get married. We had seen this happening, and we didn't get married until it was actually legalized. Even though we had had a desire and we had engaged back and forth. And I think that one of the things that we were struggling with is that society had not given our relationship a status. And that kind of became really important to us once it was legalized to kind of stand before Defiant together as one in a legal way. And I think we did that because one, our parents never really accepted our relationship, and we wanted to kind of put this stamp on it. And so the wedding kind of became that way to put a stamp, even though, you know, we love each other, and the wedding doesn't put the same kind of commitment on our love, right? It's just kind of a ceremony. And then when we actually had the wedding that we were kind of downplaying, we felt so euphoric to have everyone come together in our circle, in our chosen family, when our family didn't choose us, to just look and be there and wrap us in that warmth, that I started really feeling the impact of what a wedding could be for people, for individuals. And so that's why I use the wedding vehicle, because I myself experienced that kind of warmth and that moment that our chosen family could come together. And ultimately, it's about choosing yourself, the film, right? Our bride has to make a decision to go against her mother in the place of sort of my mother and our own family, to choose herself and what would make her happy. And I think, you know, now more than ever, we are constantly up against that, right? Choosing ourselves, choosing our love, finding each other, really being proud and out. And so that really became important for me in Ice Cold. And I was really happy to have brought this to life in that way. I think the wedding was a perfect vehicle for that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to go ahead and move on to Shima Brennan. Your film was Hold On to Me, which you directed with Rajvi Desai. And it's following Mother Latravius. So I almost never mention my book at these, but I wrote a book on LGBTQ organizations at the intersection of intersectionally marginalized communities. And this film just really brought to light the difficulties these organizations face just in daily operations, as well as the incredible people behind them who are so dedicated to their communities. Why are these organizations and the work done by the people who lead them so crucial for so many queer and trans people of color? And can you say more about the Brooklyn Ghost, which was the organization featured in the film?
Sure. So the Brooklyn Ghost Project is a nonprofit that resides in Brooklyn, New York, and GHOST stands for Guiding and Helping Others Survive Transition. And so they are an organization that helps Black and brown trans people guide them through everything like finding housing, finding jobs, figuring out what type of insurance works best for them, finding mental health care, giving them food and advice, whatever they need, education. And organizations like this are so important because we live in a world that is plagued by white supremacy, and furthermore, along with that, like cisgender, heterosexual norms. And when you kind of fall through the cracks of all of those things, the systems that are built to uplift these things, they don't uplift Black and brown, queer, and trans people. And so it's organizations like the Brooklyn Ghost Project that really fill in those gaps and also advocate for Black and brown, queer, and trans people to have more space and find ways to create a world that sustains them and looks more like them in a world that doesn't necessarily fit the norm or the type of care that they actually really need.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And you also mentioned this is being extended into a feature-length documentary. So what is it that you're going to expand about the film? Is it going to be about the organization? What other characters are going to figure into it?
So when myself and my very talented friend and co-director, Rajvi, kind of came on and started doing this work, Melody Travius was a really big push and a really big advocate for education to be used as a tool towards liberation. And so she started her own GED program just for Black and brown trans people and was constantly trying to push her chosen children to gain education. But she also suffered from kidney failure. And so as she started to feel like her life was coming towards an end, she really started to think about what her own legacy was as a Black trans woman who lived past the age of 33 to 35, which is basically the median for Black trans women in the US. And she thought about what her legacy would be and what she would leave behind, and it was her org. And so when she did pass, she passed on not only her fervor for education, but also her fight to keep her organization alive. And so we, like, as the film progresses, we're watching her like right-hand person, Ijara Moore, who's one of her closest daughters, fight to keep the organization up when she didn't really have any intention of doing so. She had her own life and her own career and kind of just stepped into this opportunity as a way to keep her mom alive, not only for herself, but for her community. And so the story has expanded to not only include Ijara and the other people in Melody Travius's life who are trying to keep this org going, who maybe didn't necessarily have the mindset that that was something that they were doing before. But we have like a 22-year-old who recently graduated from a university who wants to be a lawyer and was kind of the apple of Melody Travius's eye in terms of like what trans people could be and how they could change the system. But she also really loves ballroom. And so it's kind of this like struggle between like doing something that could potentially change things for trans people, but also doing something that you love, which also is a part of community. And then the last person that we're following is Kesha, who is 40 years old and is fighting to get her GED. And because of Melody Travius's death and kind of the push that all of her daughters and the people around her have been doing for education, a lot of people within the organization have decided to go to college. And so Kesha is one of those people who's deciding to not only do her GED, but go and get her associates at the same time. So what we're following now is just kind of what does it look like to have a legacy, and what does it look like to carry things on generationally as a way to survive past the, you know, the bare minimum that a lot of Black and brown trans people have to deal with. Like, what does it look like to like excel and strive?
Thank you so much for sharing that and for telling us a bit more about Brooklyn Ghost. And so my
Erin.
last direct question is for Harris.
Erin,
So your film is, oh yes, do you have a question?
is there any way that we could just hold space for Mother Latrevious for a moment before we move on?
Yeah,
Just hold a moment of silence for Mother Latrevious. All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for suggesting that, Sakia. That was a really excellent. And a nice transition to Harris also. So Harris, your film was just extremely entertaining and hilarious. I have to say, as someone who's always worked for a public agency as well, to watch. So when I think of sort of critical workplace comedies, almost all of them are about corporate America. Like the sort of seminal one is Office Space. So why did the filmmakers choose to focus on a public agency, a government agency, and sort of the Kafkaesque system of rules and laws that govern how public servants work?
Yeah. So DDM and I both. So he works for still a public utilities company, and I used to be an actor, and I would temp a lot, and so I had a really long-term job at an office, and so like we had this sort of overlapping experience in terms of what that corporate office was like and what it was like to be an artist within those spaces and feeling like suppressed. And so that's where that came from. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's from your own background.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
I suppose sort of what inspired you to sort of have a film about sort of screwing the system within that context?
Sure. I mean, so it was, we filmed this in the summer of 2021, right? So it's coming out of the pandemic, like everything was awful. And it just felt like joy in that moment felt radical, and it felt like necessary. It felt like the world needs to somehow like be picked up, and maybe people aren't listening to being yelled at that point. And so it felt like maybe humor is a way of like addressing societal issues. So while this is a comedy and it's fun, it was attempting to actually address deeper themes while not directly addressing them, so that maybe like comedy would make you hear, was sort of where it's coming from. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of you for sharing your inspirations behind the films. We have a couple more minutes left, so I wanted to just open it up for audience Q&A, and I have other questions I can ask too, just depending on how many we have.
Obviously, you are familiar with the trans, non-binary community. I'm just wondering, amongst your friends, are there any, we'll say, very conventional professions, such as accountancy or nursing or teaching, or any what we would call a professional career aspect? Do you find that which professions do you find trans people are being more accepted in and are striving to be professionals and maintain their sexual identity at the same time?
Can I answer this?
Yeah.
I think that transness is really interesting because it's always been around, and it's not necessarily a new thing. It's just a little bit more visible. I think of my uncle/aunt, for example. This person was born in 1940 something, so part of like the baby boom generation. And last year, they called me on the phone. They're like, "Just have something to tell you." And I was like, "Okay, Uncle Daryl, what's up? How are you?" And they were like, "Justice, I am a woman." And this person was a lawyer and also is a Baptist preacher in Nebraska. So that's wild. That's okay. You can tell what my next documentary is about, right? But it's like, I think, if you guys have anything else to say, I think it's like trans people are everywhere.
Yeah, that's basically what I was gonna say.
You know?
Trans people can do anything
Yeah, anything. Yeah.
and have been doing anything and everything.
Like also another thing that's crazy. There's a person that I looked up recently in the Haitian Revolution. Their name is Romaine La Prophétisse, and she was like a part of the beginning of the Haitian Revolution. Like ran this entire was like a general, like low key kind of violent, but like she was that girl.
Or like or Polly Murray.
Yeah.
You know, there are so many people that, you know, there are several films and documentaries made about trans people. So I would encourage you to look. And there's a film that's coming out today, I think, on HBO called The Stroll.
Yeah.
So I would definitely recommend watching that. It's incredibly moving and will give you a little bit of insight, you know, into our community and how we care for each other.
Yeah, but I agree. We have been and have always been everywhere. It's just now we're more visible, but we are in every job profession imaginable.
I produced a documentary called Kokomo City that's coming out in theaters July 28th, which is about Black trans sex workers. That is a different viewpoint than The Stroll, which Stroll is amazing, which is sort of a historical documentary, whereas this film, Dee Smith is the filmmaker, and her perspective on it was, it's like now, and it's these women talking directly about their experiences, and they're in New York and they're in Atlanta, and I would say that now, like, yes, trans people have been everywhere always, right? But also, I think that what I've seen in terms of this documentary, and you know, that passability has a lot to do with like what people have been able to do throughout time, and so that also has to do with class, that has to do with money, that has to do with access, and I think that if you are or were, because I think that with more visibility recently, there is like a furthering of a conversation, but there's also the privilege of like living in New York or living in LA, whereas, if you're somewhere else in the country where you don't have people, open to hiring you, I mean, for the most part, there was nothing legal that someone who like didn't pass could get a job. Like you basically like have a society which says, we don't deem you human and we will not hire you. And so there is access to nothing, right? And so I think it's tricky. I think it's like I think the question you're asking is really convoluted and depends on all of the circumstances of a person's life. And I think that it's wonderful that there's access to a lot more things, but there's a lot of people who don't have any access still today.
Yeah, and one more thing.
And also sorry, I just need to, translegislation.com, in order for us to continue working and protect our families, we need legislation passed to make certain that we are able to take on any job that we want. And our survival depends on it. So I hope that that's something that you'll also take note of.
And there's always like a little bit of like, I don't know, I guess I would say magic with a K, where like I am looking up here and it's like, oh, I'm not even supposed to be a director. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not even supposed to be doing this, like, oh, director is supposed to be like a white old dude. You know what I mean? And like, I'm not that. And it's like, I go into places and I'm like, oh, like, I'm not supposed to do this job, but like, I need this job to work for me. Like, this job needs to change for me. I'm not going to like learn how to be whatever for this job. I'm like, no, you can't talk to, like, even like on set, it's like, oh, you can't talk to me like this. We need we need people to use their pronouns on set. And like, we also need to figure out how to like Black people. So like, we're gonna do that,
Yeah, and I think like the idea of making something work for me resonates a lot, because I'm thinking about the people who I have worked with on Mother Wit and Hold On to Me. Like most of them have done sex work, but they've also done jobs where they have made things work for them. They went into education systems and said, no, like, you're gonna use my correct name, you are gonna treat me like a human being, I deserve to be here, and so I am. And like, that's so much of what Mother Travius is like trying to teach her own children, that like you don't have to be on the sidelines just because society says that you don't deserve these things. You take them as you should be having them.
I think we have a couple more questions. I saw the hand in the front first and then in the back.
Good evening. I'm from the Caribbean, and just giving my perspective, I follow the American news quite considerably, and I feel like from where I sit, from my perspective, like if the trans situation is like a new revolution that is happening. I feel like if we have gone past the gay, lesbian revolution, and now there's a lot of focus in the news and with the whole issue of trans and the challenges that trans people is perceived to be by society and the politics and everything. So I wonder how you all would that help you all in formulating future probably films and dealing with these issues, in the future,
I'd like to speak on behalf of, as a filmmaker from the Bahamas, shout out to the Caribbean, who is continuing to reckon with our presence on their shores. I don't think that all of the letters right now in the Caribbean sense still is up against, is still worth fighting for. I got asylum from the Bahamas, and so did two other folks, my friends, and I know people that got asylum from Jamaica and other countries. And it's still not 100% safe in those countries. The Caribbean Equality Project, which I really encourage you to support, recently was on board with passing legislation for transgender advocacy in Albany. And so I think the work that needs to be done in the Caribbean, because when I hear you say now it's just trans, I think it's every single person. There needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be a reckoning in the Caribbean with patriarchy. In the Bahamas, as a woman, I cannot bring my child to the Bahamas and get citizenship because only men can do that. So the Caribbean has a lot to reckon with when it comes to LGBTQ, when it comes to patriarchy, and I think the work is still being done. I'm glad that you brought this up because we're working on a film right now called Caribbean Queen, which features a gender non-binary character, and Justice Jamal Jones actually read for the lead recently when we had a script addressing a young person's desire to be Caribbean queen. And throughout that process of the film, we have this individual that consistently pushes up against who they are and who they want people to make sure that they identify as. So can I ask which country you are speaking from, the point of view from at this time? No, yes, I would like.
Yeah,
Is it
Trinidad and Tobago.
Trinidad and Tobago? Yes. So again, we will be addressing that in our upcoming film, and we hope that you will come back to the Roosevelt House to have a broader conversation. And we also ask you to look up on Instagram, Caribbean Equality Project. They are raising funds for visibility in the Pride Parade and in the Caribbean West Indian Day Carnival, so that we can continue to have these conversations about LGBTQIA folks in the Caribbean, which we are just beginning.
I just want to add that I don't actually think gay people are safe in America. I think like in neighborhoods, but I think that the idea that we're past like a gay revolution, like I wouldn't walk around holding my boyfriend's hand in most of this country, not even most of New York. So the idea that like gay people are okay, like I think is not true from my experience.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but I think I also think about the number of like Black and brown trans and non-binary people, like mostly Black trans women who are killed on a yearly basis, that like, continues to increase. And so, like me walking around as a Black non-binary person, there are definitely places where I fear for my life as a Black person and as a non-binary person. But I don't think that my life is as in trouble when I do walk around as a Black trans woman, and especially as like your melanin gets richer and richer. It just gets worse. People don't treat you like you're human because you are Black and because you are trans. And Black trans women have been at the forefront of the gay liberation movement when it first started, and queer people have continually pushed them aside. And so while I do believe that there is a lot of work to be done for queer people, gay people, lesbian people, bi people, and everybody of that spectrum, I still think that when it comes to trans rights, specifically when it comes to like Black trans women, we have not done enough for them. And so we need to be doing a lot more.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also like and to that, within the LGBT community, we forget that there is violence to each other. So, for example, like I'm not necessarily like I am non-binary, so there's a little bit of jumping around that I can do, and I have different like privileges with education, yada yada. But I'm not necessarily comfortable in a white gay space with white gay men, to be completely honest. Like the things that have been said to me, girl, like I'm like the violence, the like frustration, and also like even like the fetishization is like sometimes completely insane. So I think I understand where you may be coming from when you're saying, okay, we have a gay thing and then this is the trans thing, especially from a Black person's perspective, because I would see how that's working because like, for example, my dad is like, oh yeah, like there's like gay people who are like the gays are like around, you know, like he can point to like, okay, there's Don Lemon on TV. There's Anderson Cooper on television.
Totally.
There's like, you know, but then my dad's like, okay, but I never heard of, like any trans people, like any trans person, you know what I mean? And like, it's slowly trying to create that education and that visibility because it's almost even more, because queer people can live in bodies that can be a little bit, they're always kind of going to pass. Like if you're a gay man, you don't necessarily know that's a gay man. Sexuality isn't so visual as gender is. And so sexuality can kind of move through the world in a way, unless you hold hands, for example. But if you don't hold hands, you're gonna be fine maybe. But some people, no matter if they're holding hands or not, they know. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Girls been clocked. You know what I mean? I'm like, all right, so we're holding hands, we're not holding hands. I know, you know, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think like to what you said about violence within the community, I think like in the ways in this country, how we do have racial hierarchy between like LGBTQIA plus people, there's also a hierarchy there. And so if you are gay, like especially if you are white, it's definitely more passable. And like as you go down that ladder when it comes to race, it becomes more of an issue. And as you go down that ladder in terms of being gay or lesbian or queer or trans, things just become more unacceptable, like not only to people outside of your race, but inside of your race as well.
I just
And
want
I
to add
also-
to that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carmen. Go ahead.
No,
Boo.
yeah, you go first.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because I wrote an article now almost 5-6 years ago called The Trifecta of Discrimination. And there has always been really the daunting task of being a Black body within a gay space. And then you are a woman in a patriarchy sense. Then you are Black with white supremacy. The amount of discrimination that you have to continue to fight against just never stops. And so until we can present as ourselves in all spaces, the fight is not over. As we are until we can name ourselves whatever we want and people respect our pronouns and respect where we are and we don't have job discrimination, right? We're continuing to talk about Employment Non-Discrimination Act that kind of gets swept up. And we had that controversy when it came to marriage equality versus, the full passage. The work is not done. So I think that's very important for us to continue to realize as we go on with this fight.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, and I know you've been waiting, so okay. Most of the trans people who housed me or took care of me when I was 17 and didn't have a place to live in New York City are not alive anymore. And you see how young I am. So when I speak to my mentors or when I look to my trans sisters and my actual family members who have long gone, my mentor tells me, well, you have to look at it like this. There always has to be someone who, organizes the room, infiltrates the room, feeds the room, and blows up the room. So as a community of humans, whether or not you're LGBTQIA plus whatever, you got to figure out, where you fit, because that's the only way we're going to survive. So I don't want to be, constantly trying to figure out what I have, if somebody needs to stay on my couch, that's cool, that's fine. But I'm asking myself every day, what part or what role do I need to take on and how many can I juggle at one time? And I think that's where we are right now. This is not, this is like real shit. These are beautiful films. We're all very privileged to be able to make films and share our stories, but the reality is that our families are dying, so we have to do something. And I think that's also part of the reason why we do this work.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
I think Ian was first.
I was interested to hear from the Black trans creators, Black trans and non-binary, however you identify. I think particularly as when I think about what it often means to be a Black artist, it's that we're always creating for not just ourselves, but also for others. And that both comes with the joys of community, but also the pressures of being the voice for everyone. And I'm interested to hear from y'all about what that experience is for you very specifically at the intersection of being Black and trans / non-binary. As far as like who you feel beholden to and how that both serves and also challenges you.
The way that, especially with How to Raise a Black Boy, there was a lot of things working through that, because with How to Raise a Black Boy, my audience, surprisingly, and it goes to Pink and Blue, were my children, like fictitious children, wherever they're at. I don't know if I want children, I don't know. I need to find, okay, whatever. But I was like, that is a really good space to work from for me, because it allowed me to not necessarily have to like be the voice for anything and try to, I think it's great that we have films that are like that advocate and educate. I think that's amazing, but I think for How to Raise a Black Boy, that really wasn't my thing. I was just trying to figure out like how to tell the story of like where they came in, I guess, in a way that was inspiring. And while doing that, I was also telling the story to like, there was some moments where I was telling the story to like my lover, or I was telling the story to my younger version of myself, or I was telling the story to like an ancestor that's been long gone. And I think that kind of, I think there's some like beauty and magic in that. And especially like being here and like talking about the work that you are doing, like with the documentary, you're telling the story almost back to this amazing person, And like, I think audience, we can really reimagine audience, because again, film is we forget that film is a very like violent medium. It was like, again, I'll say it wasn't meant for us to do. Like, you have to think about the like words used for film. It's like shoot and capture, and like that's colonization to me, you know. And like once I think for as an artist start to reframe where you are as the artist and make it work for you, things like really start to open up.
I think in particular, the work that I've been doing on this film kind of came from my own emptiness of wondering what chosen family looks like at the intersection of being both Black and trans, specifically during COVID, where there was a lack of access to Black and trans spaces. And so I think my first audience when I started was myself, and like trying to recreate the pieces of Black family that I longed for that I didn't necessarily have access to anymore. And then after going to the Brooklyn Ghost Project and meeting everyone, and upon like Mother Latrevious' death, like my allegiance and my alliance is to her. Like this film is a piece of her legacy, and I'm very honored to play a part in that, but also she's the audience. We want to make sure that we get her right, and we want to make sure that we get her community right. So they are our audience, and then it's the wider Black and brown trans community. And if anybody outside of that takes something from it, then that's fine, but that's not necessarily the goal. I think like my goal in making film is to not make trans 101 films. Like I want to make films that are nuanced about trans people and the lives that they lead. And if people who aren't a part of those lives pick things up and learn things about themselves and others, then that's great. But my audience will first and always be the trans community.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add to that because I feel similar sentiments. You know, I didn't choose to be an artist to like, you know, have a voice and you know what I mean? Like I wasn't trying to do anything but do something that I love. And then I realized like 5 years later that I was always making like LGBTQA work. Like, and that's all I really cared about. And I just had to look at that on a sheet of paper and be like, oh, okay, this is me. This is what I care about making. And I think the unfortunate thing about being a Black, trans, or non-binary person right now as an artist is that there seems to be some sort of like, it's kind of like the commodification of pride. I feel like all of these institutions, they so badly want to, you know, book us and hear what we have to say for 1 month out of the year or for 3 festivals and not all year long. And sometimes when I see films, like I've seen some documentaries and some films over the years that center Black trans people, and I've never heard about them or seen them at a Sundance or seen them at a major festival. And I think that there's reason for that. So when I ask myself, like, why am I taking this job? I'm taking this job or doing this thing because it's something that I love and is affirming for me, but also I'm part of a legacy, whether I want to be or not. And I'm not going to shy away from that because it's not going to, I don't know, I guess I'm just like, I love this, that's why I want to do it. But I don't think that I expected to have some level of responsibility in doing that. But I feel like that is also part of the legacy that we as Black, trans, and non-binary people inherit just by existing and fighting to be seen for each other, because that creates safety for each other, whether or not we intend that to be true. I hope that makes sense. I'm like, here.
And also, like, film, as much as I was like, it's violent, it can be fun. You know what I mean? And, like, I think about also, like filmmakers over, like, the history. Like, no one really asked, like, Steven Spielberg, like, why'd you make E.T.? So what was the audience for this alien dude? You know what I mean? Like, what was the point? It's like, he just did it, you know? And I think from like your conversation, just like do what you want, you know? And like, because that's where we have to end up going, where like you're not, I even get in my head still about writing things. I'm like, okay, so what are people gonna say? Am I gonna get canceled for this? Can I put this in here? What about this? Da, da, da. And I'm thinking about things because of my identity, but I'm like, actually, just like, fuck it. And like, all right, this is what I wanna write about. This is what I'm gonna do. And it might have these things in it. And it's also, like, we're also learning that people, like something that's like made by black people who has black people in it, like white people also can go see that. And like, that is also like, they should, like, cause it's good. It's a good movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's a good movie. Like, it's not a good movie because it's black or we're trying to like learn. It's a good movie because it's good.
Can I?
Yeah.
So when we were editing this film, there were people, white people, who would be like, you know, I don't think 13 minutes, I think it's too long. And I would be like, it's really too long for you to see a story between two trans people of color have a baby. Have you seen that before? It makes you interrogate like why people feel so bold as to speak about how we create according to their terms. And that to me feels like supremacy.
And there's a lot of bad movies.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like, oh my God, like there's a lot of movies by like old dudes, and I'm like, y'all, like, we never needed this. You know what I mean?
3.5 hours long.
3.5 hours long.
Yeah, but I do think like as artists we have to be headstrong because so much of this industry is white cishet standard that, like you said, people will be like, oh, you know, that's too long, or you don't really need funding for that film, or, you know, you can do it on this shoestring budget. And like sometimes you have to be the person who's like, yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, but this film needs to be this long because of these reasons, and I know better than you do why this film needs to be that long, and you need to trust me in the same way that you trust other white people in the industry that I can tell this story, and that the story that I'm telling at the length or the amount of funding that I need is what I actually need. Like, there needs to be a level of trust for Black and brown, queer and trans filmmakers, and that trust needs to be at the same level as we do see for white filmmakers.
Can I just add that I feel like I'm not going to be satisfied until there's choice. And right now, if someone says, what are the Black lesbian films? I say Pariah and Rafiki. And that's a problem. You know, shout out to Harris for, you know, executive producing Kokomo City. We have Kokomo City and The Stroll. Like, until I can go to Netflix and there's a choice, right, where I can choose between 10 or more. I'm just going to say 10 or more because, you know, I'm trying here. Then I will be satisfied. And we're not at that level yet. So whatever you can do to support LGBTQIA filmmakers, please do so. Folks, if you're fundraising for anything, please tell folks the link. Like, what is the link for Mother Wit? Where can we send $1 to you? Definitely $100, but where can we send money to you so that your film continues forward? You know, same thing. Let's make sure that that is in the chat. Let's make sure that that is left where people have an action to give something today to really support.
And also, you're at the center, because I think also one movie that also like blew my mind recently about like how the world reacted to it was Little Mermaid. Blew my mind, because this movie is not about slavery. This movie is not about like the civil rights movement. It's about a mermaid. And she's beautiful, and she like really gave, honestly, like Halle Bailey like did that. And like, but it like agitated, it like brought up this like violence and anger because there was nothing that like, I guess, I made a little bit of help with this. There's nothing that like pinned her down. I guess that like was like, all right, so this is a black movie. This is like a black movie. It was like, oh no, this is my movie that now I have to watch with a black person in it. Or like, it's a movie. Like, I have to engage with this movie just being like where it is, you know? And like, I think that's also interesting too, where when you talk about audience, about what is the intent on like why they're going there. Like Black people can also have like beautiful, fun, fantastical things happen. But for some reason, the world just couldn't get over that. Like it was just so, I'm still like my brain is kind of blown out by it, because we've seen so many movies of Black people, but this movie and it being I think this is what it was. It was the most commercial thing maybe of the year, and it had a Black girl in it, and commercial doesn't mean Black. People don't believe that yet, or still, I don't know. I just think that's like something to think about a little bit.
I will say that ever since that movie came out, my little kid is absolutely obsessed with mermaids, and she did not care about mermaids until that movie came out. So it's been all mermaids ever since it happened. But I just we're at time. But it's been a wonderful conversation. I wanted to especially thank you for that last question. That was a really wonderful question to end the event on. And I want to thank all the filmmakers for allowing us to use the space at Roosevelt House to show your films and to have conversation about your films. And I especially want to thank Sakia for bringing these films to us at the Roosevelt House. We really always try to bring event for the public, so that really made it happen. Yes, so thank you all. And also thank you, Harold Holzer and the staff at the Roosevelt House for making this happen. This concludes our Pride Month programming and our programming for the 2022-2023 academic year. We're going to be beginning planning for 2024, so stay tuned for next year. We're going to likely have events on LGBTQ reproductive justice and probably one on LGBTQI plus immigration coming forward. Did you have something you wanted to say, Sakia, to close the event? Oh, I thought I heard you.
Is it Sekia or Sakia? How do you say your name?
Sakia.
Sakia, I'm so sorry, yes.
No worries. Thank you all so much for coming. I said what I mean what I said. You all are there with the filmmakers. Please ask them what it's going to take to get their next project made. Mother Wit is fundraising for their feature film, so please make sure that you reach out. And thanks again, and happy Pride, everybody.
Thank you.